Everyone. Thank you. Yes, thank you for joining meeting. And please note that today's session is being recorded as usual. And it's good to see many familiar faces. Our workshop in Broader last year. And I'd like to thank you for the valuable comment and input you provide on the baseline report. And your feedback has been very helpful in clarifying concept and strengthening the practical relevance of the work. And today's discussion built directly on those exchange. The following the broader workshop last October, we will focus on the framework for the statistical definition of SSE. The aim of the today meeting is to further discuss and consolidate the framework as we move forward. And looking ahead, once the framework is consolidated, our meeting will be gradually shift to the other key areas, such as the work and implement in SSE, indicators, and data collection method. I'd also like to mention that we are working on establishing a community of practice on cooperative and SSE statistics. And if you have any colleague or expert to recommend, we'd happy to receive your suggestion. And in terms of today's agenda, the meeting will be less around 90 minutes, and we will start with a presentation by Kiara on the proposed framework, and followed by the discussion that is facilitated by Hyungsik based on your input. And before we begin, does anyone has a brief comment or question? I cannot see any hands raised. So if not, I will hand the floor to Kiara. Kiara, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nawan. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so do you see my screen moving also? Okay, so as Nawan already said, today we are here to present you an update of the work we shared with you before Christmas regarding the statistical definition of the SSE. Before Christmas, we shared with you a draft of a baseline report concerning the definition of SSE, based also on the discussion we had during the Bordeaux meeting at the end of October. And we thank you for all the comments and feedbacks you provided over the last weeks, which were very useful. And basically, what I would like to do today is to go through all the ILO principles and basically see how we can operationalize them. Also emphasizing, highlighting some change.
Can check the chat box. Chat box, I put a link.
Okay. Highlighting some changes we are proposing based also on the inputs and comments we got from you. So before going into the discussion about the criteria and the operational criteria we are proposing to set the statistical perimeter of the SSE, we would like to make a step back into the aim of our goal, the aim of our project, and what we are doing with this technical working group. Just to be sure we are on the same page. So basically, we already presented this during the last webinars and also in Bordeaux. So we have an institutional definition of SSE, which was approved at the 2022 International Labour Conference. And what we are doing right now is working on the statistical definition, both at the conceptual and operational level, in order to provide guidance to National Institute of Statistics and other statistics compiler, provide guidance on how to compile statistics and on social and solidarity economy. So the focus of this in this phase, the focus of our work and of this technical working group is on the statistical definition, meaning that we have to identify the characteristics that are common across the different SSE and which differentiate SSE entities from other institutional units, We have to work on the concepts, provide the concepts that can guide the compilation of statistics, and then we have to translate the definition and concepts into an operational guide and operational criteria that can support people in identify the population of the SSE for statistical scope. In this process, we are focusing on the definition, and this definition will support a screening process of the SSE. We got some comments and feedback during the last weeks concerning the screening process, and what we would like to highlight, is that we are not thinking about a process in which each operational criteria should be verified unit by unit, but we are thinking about a screening process which is composed by different steps. And please consider this slide as a preliminary slide, because we still have to discuss the screening process and we have still to finalize this process. But the general idea is that so basically, if an NSO or any other statistics provider want to compile statistics on social and solidarity economy, first of all, we have to filter the sectors, institutional sectors in which we can find units belonging to the SSE. And in a practical way, in practical terms, these meanings looking also at the values of the principles of the SSE, that we need, first of all, to filter out the public government sector, institutional sector. So we can exclude the public government sectors, and then we have a second step. If we can rely on a national or regional SSE framework law, and if this law is aligned with the ILO principles, then all the type of entities which are listed in the law can be considered in scope for statistics. On the other side, if we cannot rely on national framework law on social and solidarity economy, or if there is a partial or an unclear alignment between the law and the ILO principle, then we need to assess the individual legal forms. We have to look at the law on specific legal forms and see whether these laws are aligned with the ILO principles. If they are aligned, then the legal form is included. If not, then we have to apply the operational criteria we are discussing to filter out some of the entities that are established in a specific legal form. So we are not saying that in all the context, in all the possible scenario, we have to filter the units one by one. We are thinking about this process. In some cases, it might be necessary to filter the units not based on the legal form, only on the legal form, but also find other ways to apply the operational criteria to filter in or filter out the units. One more comment about this slide. As I said, this is a very preliminary framework for the screening process. We are still discussing this. We still need to work on this. And it's clear to us that as we are working on framework law and legal forms, this screening scheme, this screening process does not fully cover informal units. We got some comments regarding informal units and the need to be explicit about their inclusion in the SSE statistical perimeter. We know there is this need. The fact is that there will be a dedicated research work on the issue of informal entities that still need to be carried out. So in the end, when this part of the research work on informal entities will be ready, it will be included in these general conceptual frameworks in order to cover both formal and informal entities. So this is just a general introduction before moving to the different criteria and the operationalizations of the criteria. A last recall before moving to the criteria and the principles. I just recalled a slide presented by Marie in June, if I'm not wrong, at the end, in one of our first meeting, probably the second one at the end of June. These slides highlight basically the key points of the ILO definition of the SSE. As we already discussed, the ILO definition covers both characteristics, principles of the SSE, and also provide a list of statistical units that are included in the definitions, meaning cooperatives, association, mutuals, foundations, social enterprises, self-help groups, and other entities, if these units operate in are aligned with the values and principles of the SSE. Okay, considering all this, today we are going to go through the 5 principles, and we are going to talk about the decisions we took about the operationalization of these principles. So, first of all, the first principle is the collective and or general interest. During the Bordeaux meeting, we spent a lot of time discussing how to define the general interest. And I think there was an agreement on the idea of considering collective and or general interest as an overreaching concept. And there was an agreement on the fact that collective and or general interest cannot be linked only on the fact that there is a mission, a declared mission of the organization, and on the fact that these type of interests can be measured through 2 other criteria, 2 other ILO principles that are included in the ILO definition. Basically, the primacy of people and social purposes and over capital, and the democratic and or participatory governance. I don't think that on these points there were no major issue concerning this approach in the comments we got from you. So there was some concern about how to apply this approach, but I think that these concerns were mainly related to the fact that there was a misunderstanding in how we were proposing to apply this criteria, so implying a unit-by-unit assessment. And I think that the screening process I presented before already helped to clarify a little bit our idea and addressed the concerns we got from you. Talking about voluntary cooperation and mutual aid, during the meeting in Bordeaux, we also had some time to discuss this principle. Basically, the key point is that the operational criteria we can find at the moment in the 2025 SNA edition refers only to voluntary participation. In the ILO definition, we have the voluntary attribute, but we also have a clear reference to the cooperation and mutual aid. The feedbacks we got from you, in the feedback we got from you, there is an agreement on the fact that from a conceptual point of view, it's important to have a distinction between these concepts so participation, cooperation, and mutual aid. But there was some also comments about the difficulty and limitations in using cooperation and mutual aid as general operational criteria to set the general statistical perimeter of the SSE. So we would like to propose a way to move forward on this. And basically in our idea, what we would like to propose is to use the voluntary participation as it is stated in the SNA as filtering criteria, and to use the cooperation and mutual aid not as field screening criteria for defining the SSE statistical perimeter, but to treat them and specify them as structural features of SSE entities which are oriented to collective interest. This means that in the table, which is included in the baseline report and which tries to sum up the ILO principles, the analytical dimensions, and the operational definitions and operational criteria we are proposing, voluntary participation will be included as operational criteria, while we are not providing an operational definition and operational criteria for cooperation and mutual aid, meaning that we are not going to use them to screen, to filter units out from the perimeter of the SSE. The next principle refers to the democratic and or participatory governance. First of all, we need to remember the fact that the ILO definition explicitly includes both democratic and participatory governance. So we need to, both democratic and or participatory governance need to be reflected in the statistical definition. So we need to take also the participatory governance into account. But we can also highlight the fact that the position of the words, so democratic comes before participatory governance in the definition, and we can take this as a signal that there is a normative reference pathway to the democratic governance. From the comments we got from you, so in the comments we got from you, there are no main issues or comments or objections regarding the democratic governance. The main challenge probably is in the operationalization of the participatory governance, especially for the non-member based organizations in which we cannot find democratic governance in strict sense and in which democratic governance cannot be assessed. So we got a long list of comments regarding these principles, some on the conceptual level, some on statistical levels. And based on the comments we got from you, we proposed to, so we were good with the proposal regarding the democratic governance as we wrote the proposal we made in the baseline report regarding the democratic governance. We are proposing a change, revision, let me say, regarding the operationalization, the criteria that can be used to measure participatory governance. And we are proposing you a compatibility approach, meaning that we would like to combine some criteria that can be used to exclude governance arrangements that are clearly non-compatible with the SSE, and then to introduce some criteria regarding institutional safeguards on the mission based on observable and observable conditions. This means that compared to the table we shared in the baseline report, we are proposing some changes in the operational criteria that can be used to define, to measure the participatory governance in non-member-based entities. In the previous version of the document, we only referred to formal arrangements safeguarding the mission over time. And in the document, we made a clear reference to internal mechanisms, such as trustee bodies or similar bodies we can find in institutions. But we decided also to introduce external oversight or supervision by public or independent authorities, because we got some comments about this, some examples from different countries in which there is an oversight from independent authorities or public authorities on the mission of foundations, for example. And beside these criterion on formal arrangements that safeguards the mission, we decided also to introduce the other criteria that are listed here, which exclude decision-making based on the capital, basically. Okay, so moving to the autonomy and independence, I think that this criterion is very well covered by the existing statistical standards. We can find our definition of autonomy and independence in the 2025 SNA. There is also a clear definition of the control. The only main additional clarification we introduced in our report is the concept of control of SSE entities by for-profit units, because we needed to include these additional clarification for setting the perimeter. We also asked you to provide feedbacks and inputs on two very specific questions. One was related to SSE units controlled by other SSE units, whether they should be considered independent. And in the end, the answer could be yes, provided that they meet the general criteria of autonomy and independence. So we should look at the general criteria as stated in the SNA. And the second one was related to non-SSE units controlled by SSE units, and whether these controlled unit should be included in the scope of statistics on SSE. We had different comments on this. We are proposing to not include non-SSE units controlled by SSE units in the core perimeter of the SSE, so they are not part of the core perimeter of the SSE, but maybe they could be counted separately for statistical purpose without affecting the core definition on which we are working on. As for the operational criteria, I didn't list in this table all the operational criteria that are listed in the SNA, but in the SNA, we already have a clear definition of independence, and if you look at the baseline report, you will find all the operational criteria that can be applied to identify say whether a non-profit institution is independent from the public sector or independent from other corporations. So in the SNA, there is a clear guidance on these criterion. Moving to the last principle, so the primacy of people and social purpose over capital. We discussed a lot about this principle during the Bordeaux meeting, and we came to the conclusion that what the basic characteristics of the SSE entities is not just whether they distribute or not profit, but it's whether there are institutional arrangements that ensure that profits, surplus, and assets remain oriented to the interests of the entities, so to the collective and or general interests. We asked you to provide inputs and comments on a very specific question related to non-monetary forms of surplus allocation. We got very interesting inputs about this. And in our idea, probably the best solution could be to acknowledge at the conceptual level the non-monetary forms of surplus allocations, while recognizing that there are limitations in their measurement, statistical measurement. And the fact is that right now we have, let me say, strict timeline for our project, and probably we do not have enough time to provide guidance on how to measure non-monetary forms of surplus allocations. And so we could mention this issue as potential, as an issue that need further work in the future, that should be covered in future with more research and more reflection. Talking about the operational criteria, in the report, in the baseline report, we provided different operational criteria that can be applied to non-profit institutions, which have a full non-profit distribution constraints. We decided to make a change compared to the baseline report. So in the baseline report, if you look at the table, in the baseline report, you will see that we treated cooperatives and mutual societies together. We decided to split the two categories. And as for the cooperatives, in the baseline report, we looked at the different instruments that can be used to measure how profits and surplus are distributed among members, if they are distributed. But in the end, we think that probably we can just refer to the ILO guidelines concerning statistics on cooperatives, which clearly provide an indication on how, in the definition of the cooperative concept, on how profits and surpluses should be distributed among members. And as for mutual societies, we are proposing to introduce this criterion, but of course I would like to hear from you about this idea and the operational criteria we are proposing for mutual societies, and whether we are missing something or anything that can be introduced for mutual societies to measure the primacy of people and social purposes. For example, in cooperatives, we have indivisible reserves, and I was wondering whether there are similar instruments for mutual societies that we should take into account in this table. So these are very briefly basically the operational criteria that we are proposing to operationalize all the different ILO principles. I know that Yunsik then will guide the discussion in the next hour about these principles. I just wanted to briefly provide you an overview of the next steps of our work. So based on the comments we got and the discussion we are going to have today we are going to consolidate the framework we are proposing for the statistical definition of SSE. And once we have consolidated this part of the work, we are going to work on the screening logic, and we also need to focus on key dimension and indicators that need to be measured, in particular focusing on the topic of work within the SSE. All the reflection regarding the statistical definition, the screening process, and the dimension and indicators that need to be covered will be included in the final report we are working on, taking account also informed by your reflection and contribution. This report, together with the other report on informal SSE entities, will be basically the starting point for working and drafting the guidelines on statistics on SSE, and to work on a room document that will be discussed with different stakeholders, including member of, I think, this technical working group. And these two documents will be presented at the next ECILS conference in Geneva in 2028. So these two final documents, the guidelines and the room document, will be presented at the conference in Geneva in 2028. These are the next steps. The final report will be finalized in coming months, before summer, I think. And of course, we will share with you updates on this document in order to get also your inputs and suggestions on different sections of the report. I think that's all, very briefly. And I leave the floor to Yunsik for discussion and comments.
Okay, thank you, Chiara, for your presentation, and thank you also for others to join today's meeting, although there was some technical issue at the beginning. So now we proceed some Q&A and also discussion in using each topics. So I would like to use the same presentation file, but I will take one by one to remind you any question or the proposal on each topics, and then we will close probably earlier than we expected, because we already did this exercise several times. So we will probably have more capacity to manage this quickly. So as the Chiara explained, we are in this process. So I skip this part. So, and this work, the screening process, we will talk later. So it's more difficult or a bit technical part, but as you can imagine that different contexts, particularly the institutional arrangement on SSE in different countries, people might understand SSE in a different ways. So that's the reason we are trying to elaborate this kind of the filtering to help you to identify how this or framework can be implemented in your context, but it will be done later. So today we focus on these 5 principles and how we can make these principles embedded in the ILO definition of SSE into conceptual and statistical definition. So let's talk one by one principles, and then Chiara will complement whenever you can, also to explain more or to answer the members' question. Okay, let's start first by this the umbrella idea about collective and general interest, which is key of the concept of the SSE we promote. And I think the one of the particular dimension of our work is that this collective and or general interest, which is the key element of the SSE entities should be considered as kind of the interconnected set of the operational principles, not as this one as independent indicator. I think this is the key idea. Actually, our approach is now proposing, and then to prove this collective annual general interest dimension, we need to check other 4 criteria. That's our main argument. So I think we can start by talking about this issue. If you have any question or doubt or proposal on this approach, please feel free. Of course, you can also revisit when we deal with other topics, but now it's better to focus on each topic. Because I don't see the raise hand, please use the function of the raise hand function. Otherwise, I cannot see your all your photos. Okay. It's clear for you, everybody? Agreeable? Usually, this timing, Mari intervened several times.
Augustin just said in the chat that he agrees. So I think, merci.
Okay. Oh, now on. If you can check the chat box, please help me because I cannot see the chat box either.
And we're receiving thumbs up going up our screens right now. So I guess this is approval marks.
Okay. But probably you all must understand this approach is quite important because we know that there are other approaches that saying if a organization can prove their social mission with the kind of the statement in their bylaw or somewhere, it's okay to show the prove their social mission oriented nature. But this is our approach is quite different from that approach. So we know that some countries, some legislation define that the written statement on the social mission would be the kind of the important criteria to define whether this is part of social enterprise or social economy or not. But for our approach, that's not the core criteria. There might be, but not. But that should be supported by other criteria. That's our key argument you want to say. So that's not the only one, but that might be complementary if the legislation or the other approach proposed that the written statement it's good. It's not against of this approach, but it should be supported by other criteria which can be proved by checking other criteria. Okay, then the second principles, when we worked on these 5 principles, this was one of the most difficult criteria because this is basically the combination of 2 dimensions. One is about voluntary nature of the participation or the joining the organization. The other is about the way we work, like cooperation or mutual aid. Usually for other, like the cooperative principle, cooperation and mutual aid is mentioned in value, one of the values, not as principle. So, but here there's 2, the dimension was combined and mentioned as key element. It's important, but as we see, we had difficulty in using this concept for the non-member based organizations. So that's the reason why we propose consider this only the voluntary participation dimension as key criteria and not cooperation and mutual aid as key element, but we can consider it as important for the member-based organizations. And do we have any question, doubt?
There is one comment from Joanne in
Yeah.
chat box. Yeah.
Joanne, you can directly make your voice if you wish.
You see my question? I mean, it really had to do with the previous note.
Okay.
And it just seems, I mean, I'm really following what you're saying, but it all seems very complex. And I know you're going to talk about the implementation later, but I think it is important to have some sense of how we're going to implement these criteria because it seems pretty abstract. And I mean, are we doing a case-by-case study of the various units?
So you
I'm
mentioned
just
about
applying what I know from labor force surveys or work or surveys of work, and it just seems, how are you going to implement this in administrative in the kind of administrative records that are the source of data for this for social solidarity economy?
Chiara, you can.
Maybe, I don't know, Joan, if you, because I saw you join later, I don't know if you heard the beginning of a presentation about the screening process. Maybe Yunshik, if you can move back.
I'm not sure I did. Or if it did, it didn't register. So if you can refer me to that, I would be happy to
Yeah.
look at it again.
Because basically, so we are still, as I
Slide number 2, Yungshik.
This one?
No, the other one I was thinking
Sorry,
about
3. Yeah.
3.
This one.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. That's actually the one I'm talking about. I mean, so it seems to me that the objective of the standards that you're are defining is to get a measurement in the SNA. You're not so interested in the units themselves as a self-standing indicator. You're interested in the contribution to the SNA. Everything is sort of linked to the SNA. Is that correct? Is that the objective of the standards that we're working on to have some data on the contribution of the SSE to the GDP?
No.
I mean, we were doing these standards, and what's the objective? What kind of statistics are we trying to prepare? I think that we need to think about that.
Okay. Who can? Yeah. Mari and David, please.
Well, good question. We use the SNA for reference concept. So this is what where we're at right now, so that we don't develop concepts that are not part of the statistician's Bible. Doesn't mean that we're aiming to calculate the GDP. At this point, we're trying to just identify the units within the, so for example, the sector, SNA sector, we are not going into government units. So some sectors are immediately not considered, and that's the way to explain it, using the SNA vocabulary.
David, please. David, you are muted.
My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I do share some of Joanne's concerns, whilst I completely agree that at this stage, what we're trying to do is work out how to define these units in relation to the national accounts, to the SNA, and some other units that might not necessarily be adequately covered in SNA-based accounts. But yes, we do need to focus on what statistics we can collect. And I do share concerns that identification of relevant units within suitable data sources could be difficult. So we probably are going to need to start to focus on simplified ways of identifying these units, or perhaps of making sure that they're identifiable in statistical business registers, which would mean adding information to statistical business registers, as we've already proposed for cooperatives. But these are steps down the track. But I think it is important that we do focus on what kind of statistics we ultimately want to be able to produce. And some of that, I think, is possibly already defined for cooperatives. Many of those things will probably also be relevant for other types of SSE entity, but there may be some other things as well. So things about the total contribution to employment, yes, and the total contribution to GDP, but perhaps some wider measures of contributions to social well-being, which are quite difficult things to measure. When we start to look at data sources, I think that household surveys such as the labour force survey are possibly going to be challenging as data sources for many of these things, unless we can manage to match information in household surveys in some way reliably with entities in the SSE. And we know very well that trying to link responses on the name of your employer or the name of an organization that you belong to things in statistical business registers is very, very difficult. So I think it's most likely that sorry, I just had a message that popped up on my screen and distracted me. I think it's unlikely that we'll be able to source much data from normal household surveys, and rather that we'll be looking at statistical business registers and data collected in surveys of enterprises, which is fine for those things that we'll find on statistical business registers, but it still leaves a gap for entities that might not be there, especially in informal sector entities that we still need to look at. So look, Joanne, I fully agree with some of your concerns, but we're at, I think, a still relatively early stage of working out, well, what are the entities that should be included? Then how do we identify them in relevant statistical data sources is still a step that we need to take.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Marie. Joanne, is it enough for you to now understand or what they explained? So your question is partly probably solved, or you are muted? I don't hear you. Joanne? Oh, okay, you can probably react later on. Okay, other comments or other, yeah, we can revisit other principles as well. So feel free to raise your, the hands. Okay, so then I will go back to our the order of the principles. So we talk about the voluntary cooperation and mutual aid principle. And third one was about the democratic and or participatory governance principles. So I think we realized that this is one of the key characteristics of this SSE sector to be defined. And there was quite broad consensus on this principle. Do you have any other comments or question in this regard? Also some operational dimensions here. Uma, please.
Yeah, if you could go back to the earlier slide, I think my concern here is, especially when you're talking about democratic or participatory governance, how do you actually operationalize this, even if you're talking about a survey? Like, this is quite a complicated thing, and I've been wondering, how do you ask these kinds of questions and get the responses, and to ensure that whether the governance mechanism is democratic or participatory? Unless and until this is a dedicated module where you actually train the particular investigator with all of this. So I'm just thinking of, at an operationalizing level, how are we going to do it? I'm not sure about it and would love to hear more about this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ma. Chiara, you may.
It's a tricky issue. We discussed a lot about this. And so talking about, again, we have different issues to address because referring to formal entities and talking about democratic governance, probably the first step in order to identify the units that can be considered in scope is to look at the SSE framework law, or to look at laws on specific legal forms. So that, for example, for cooperatives, we already have the guidelines on statistics on cooperatives that clarify what is considered to be democratic governance. So to check whether the legal legal framework is aligned with our conceptual and operational definition. The tricky part, I think, is on the participatory governance. And so we got very different comments and inputs about this. And it's quite clear how to define, how to conceptualize participatory governance. Then the problem is how to measure it on the operational level. And the idea of introducing this, we called compatibility approach. So it's a way to turn around the problem, probably, because we didn't find, so at the beginning, we suggested to focus on the existence of specific bodies within the organization, such as the trustee bodies. But then someone raised some concern in the way which people in these boards are appointed, or rules governing these bodies. So we are talking about statistics, and we know that it's not possible to check one case by one case. So we have to find a general rule. We didn't find any operational criteria that could be useful to say this is for sure participatory governance. So the idea to exclude what is not participatory governance could be a way to find a solution to this problem. Again, for sure, the first step for formal entities could be to look at the legal forms, but then it could be also necessary to find other way to access this criterion, whether because there is no law, or whether because the law is not clear about this point. We need to reflect on how to move in these cases. We got some examples. Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the survey which is carried out in Quebec could be, I'm not sure whether on this point specifically, but in Quebec we have a survey. There are some specific operational questions which are used to filter out units. So we can look at example like this to try to figure out which kind of questions can be used in surveys or in the process of assess administrative resources. I know we still have to find a way to better explain the process, but it's not an easy task on this point because we know that the participatory governance is a tricky issue. I don't know if I replied to your question.
No, I think you have, and I think that's the issue that I wanted to raise, basically saying, how do you actually capture that? And how do you actually go about ensuring that you're going to get the right responses? Let me put it that way.
If I may, I think Marie-Paule Robichaud is online. I don't know if she wants to answer about how the survey in Quebec is run.
I can. Actually, we have questions about the democratic governance. However, they're not simple to administrate as people don't really necessarily understand it. And we have some entities that are not member-based, and it's not easy to know if the stakeholder are participating or not with the questions we have right now. So we're more in an imperfect approach.
Which is better than nothing.
Well, one could argue saying that which is better than nothing, at least you have something, but I think the question then becomes, what are you capturing as a result of it, and how appropriate that is, and what is it that you want to draw from it? So I think if you have experimented it in Quebec, and exactly the point that Marie-Paule raised was my concern, how much of it is an understanding and awareness about some of this? So, what is it that we need to do around it to get to a point where we get the kind of right responses? I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at. Thanks a lot.
If I may, again, we're at the stage where we're relatively at high level a statistical definition. Of course, we need to envisage already whether this is operationable or not. But we could, I don't know that at this stage we should, for example, reject one principle because it's hard to operationalize. I think we should keep them right now and see how they are operationalized in different surveys. But that is a next step from my understanding of our mandate at this stage, is that it is a next step. So it is difficult to keep reminding ourselves of this because we need to know if it is going to be possible. But we know it is done. But we haven't looked at each survey, each result of population identified as SSE, each footnote explaining what are the margin of errors regarding each criteria. We're not at this stage, but we have to think about it. So thank you for your questions. They're very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Marie-Paule and Marie. And other comment or question about this point, this democratic and or participatory governance? Marie, please.
We probably have less an issue with democratic in terms of how difficult that is, because it's quite documented. There's how do you elect your representatives, and then how do they operate within their councils. Participatory governance is the most less documented in literature, and we probably need to find examples of what is meant. And sometimes I know Statistics Canada often uses that a proxy in a question saying, do you look like this or do you look like that? And then the organization is able to better identify its way of governing using the participation of either stakeholders or members.
David?
Yeah, I agree with what's just been said, but I think we're possibly looking at a bit of an iterative process in which we come up with the outline of a definition for statistical purposes, and then we actually try to work out how to get some data, what the potential data sources might be, and then may need, as a result of that, to be there. It may be necessary to go back to revisit some of the definitional material that we've come up with to reflect what is actually achievable in particular data sources. We need to understand better what sorts of data sources are suitable. We've seen that specific survey. We know that in Quebec there are, I think it's surveys which specifically target the SSE, and it would be important to understand closely how that works, how that identify which entities should be included. But and we need to look in as many countries as we can to find that out, how this is actually done, what is actually feasible in different types of data source, and that may vary from country to country because the different institutional forms for what we're calling foundations and associations may vary from country to country, and there might be some institutional forms which are definitely always in, and others that are definitely always out. So there are elements of implementation at national level that also need to be considered. So I think we need to look at this stage as a bit of an iterative process, but we must start at least with the outline of an operational definition, which we feel is capable of working. But it's likely that at national level, this would need to be adapted to reflect national circumstances, national legislation, national data sources.
Yes.
I think I've stopped.
Thank you. Also, Thomas mentioned in the chat box that it seems we should create criteria that will be realistic in implementation. The problem is that most countries lack research that can answer these questions. So I think now I feel that we are now moving to the next step. So now we have kind of the good idea about the conceptual and the operational definition of the SSE. Then now we are now realizing the importance of how we can really identify this unit in our statistical sources. So that's if among the participants, if you have any, for example, the experience about having survey or other data collection to identify or to deal with this participatory governance issue. So you can share your experience if you have any specific method to to identify entity which are considered democratic or participatory governance, and how? No. Do you have any experience or example you wanted to share?
I can share it later. I don't have it on hand right now.
Okay. When we examine the document, many countries have a kind of the formal approach, which means that the legislation define the entities, saying that it should be democratic operation and define some the operational the method like the General Assembly, one member, one vote, or etc. etc. So, but when the organization are created according to the legislation, they are just considered as democratic because they respect all these procedures. That's more formal approach. We know many countries already use this approach, but if you have any other particular approach on that, it would be interesting to hear. Yes, who raised hand? Yannick first.
Yes, thank you. It's not exactly a survey, but what we can say that we use in France this concept for foundation, because foundation, they don't have a democratic governance, but we think and we say that it's a participatory governance. That means that it's important in the foundation that not only the founder take part of the management and the governance of the foundation, but they are obliged to take in account, for example, other stakeholders, employees, and most of the time, some of them are members of the board. And also, but it's more complicated because it's more something like representation of the general interest. The most important foundations, they have representative of government in the governments. Also, it may be contradictory with the fact that it's independent and not a public body, but in fact, it's a way to avoid the fact that the government is only between founders.
Thank you. And Maripol?
I'm not sure if my comment will be useful to the discussion, but we did observe in certain contexts that by the book, some entities have been qualified and studied by government bodies to say, okay, you're in the scope of democratic governance, but 10 years, 20 years later, there's kind of, you're shifting to less participatory. The board elects the board and here it goes. So if you take it by the letter, the foundation letter, it's okay. But when you see how they evolve in time, and if you take it 20 years later, you say, okay, you're no democratic governance. So there's the book and there's a reality, and it shifts. So when you say it's okay now, it's not always okay, and that brings reflection or on who we recognize in the context of programs and governmental help, but still, it's a shifting reality, democratic governance.
Do you have any specific question to check that part in your survey?
No, in our survey, we ask, like, what is it in your book?
Okay, that's a written statement you consider.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Again, better than nothing.
Okay. Yeah, sure. It's and also the written the document is also the kind of the proof, and also sometimes it work as self-regulation. So it can be forgotten, but it can be activated when people realize to use that document to really give life to the organization. Yeah. Okay. So if but this is very long history of the question, the debate. The democracy can be formal and also substantial, but not always the both. So how we can really measure or check whether this a entity is democratic or not. So I think it's not our immediate mandate, but probably something we need to consider during our work. Okay, then if there is no more question or issue with this point, let's move to next point. So autonomy and independence. I believe this is quite clear and very obvious the principle, but as we saw when we implement this principle in the reality, we have some tricky cases like because with more complicated the organizational structure. Now it's very difficult to say what is really independence vis-a-vis in the grouping or subsidiary or other networking. So I think it's not easy question, although the principle is very clear. And do you have any thought on this, or any experience you had when you conducted any survey or data collection? This kind of the complexity, how do you deal Marie-Paul, please.
We are addressing this question right now in our reflection for what is SSE and not. And in our portrait, we did include non-SSE unit controlled by SSE, because in some sectors, it's a main component, and the plus value generated by those units, private units, in some way are bring back to the SSE controlling parent. But it's a tricky thing, the controlled, and we also have the issue with the control by governance or control by property, which are two things that you cannot assert the same way by data and statistics. We are trialing the capacity of our statistic agency right now to frame the relations between the entities and to see if they can, by the, what do you call it, les impôts, Marie, s'il vous plaît.
Tax forms.
Tax. With the tax form from the businesses, if they can relate the entities within them, so we can see who's the mother, who's the kid in that, and see where we should stop the scope. So it's tricky. Right now, we've been including non-SSE units, and as a part of the SSE economy, but we are not including SSE unit controlled by SSE as SSE. Like they're part of the SSE economy, but they're not SSE as they're not democratic governance. So I don't know if I'm clear, but it's a really complex question in which we are looking right now.
Right. Thank you. And other countries, I think many of you have some same problem. Eduardo, please.
Sorry. Well, first of all, I'm sorry. I apologize for my late arrival. I'm sure certain I skipped some of the discussions. I'm sorry for that. But to give the Portuguese experience on this regard, on the first satellite account we did, we considered all organizations that were 100% owned by SSE entities, even if they themselves weren't, especially some enterprises that are owned by big cooperatives, essentially that, because the reality is that, as Marie-Paul just said, they are a crucial part of the economic environment of the SSE. However, following our framework law, some doubts arose regarding this inclusion, and what we decided or ended up deciding is to not include them within the perimeter, not include them within our main statistical framework, but we do maintain some calculations and estimations for those organizations. Because yes, in fact, it is important to account for them to truly understand the economic weight of the sector, but they're not part of SSE. This was our main conclusion. And why this? Because in our perspective, there was a reason behind the fact that these organizations were created deliberately under a different legal form, so they can have access to, even if they're 100% controlled by SSE entities, but they have flexibility enough to operate in a different way. So following this, we concluded that we shouldn't consider them SSE. However, this can change. For instance, imagine that a status that we don't have yet in Portugal of social enterprises, for instance. Most of these organizations eventually could fall within the conceptualization of a social enterprise. However, in Portugal, because we do not have legal support for including them, for considering them social enterprises, we have not yet included them within this perimeter, statistical perimeter of social economy. But we do have statistics for them, so it is a way to at least have numbers and have a full picture. Yeah, so this was our approach. I end with this question. Of course, we're talking about only 100% owned entities. So the question is, where does the threshold ends? Is it 100%? Is it more than 50%? This is another question. We ended up deciding to consider only 100% owned. Okay? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. David? You are muted. Yeah.
What Eduardo's described is effectively the sort of conclusion we came to with statistics of cooperatives, that in some countries, the ownership and control of non-cooperative entities by cooperatives is so important that if we want to understand the full economic weight and social impact of the cooperative movement, we need to include these entities that they own and control. And my recollection is that we chose a 50%. Basically, if there's a controlling interest, it's more than 50%. But they're part of the statistics of cooperatives, but it's if you like, it's a supplementary statistic. It shouldn't be added. If we want to understand the total impact of the cooperative movement on employment, or the full economic weight in GDP terms, it's important to include this group, but to be able to identify them separately. And I would see that a similar approach could be adopted where in cases where other types of SSE entities control non-SSE entities. Now, I'm not certain that really exists beyond the cooperative movement, but it may well.
Thank you. Yannick, for the mutual societies, are there many cases like the mutual society itself is kind of the mother company and having big size of the commercial subsidiary? And I know that in France now the different big mutuals made kind of the coalition to make the big size of the groups to cover different the sectors. So Yannick is there. Okay, so probably Yannick can prepare his response to my answer question. Meantime, Augustin.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, just regarding those non-SSE entities that are controlled by SSE, I have just one remark. It's regarding cross-border and international control, where, if statistics are collected nationally, well, I don't have any data potentially on all those enterprises controlled by Belgian SSE. So there is this international discrepancy in terms of collection of data. So for me, if we do collect this information, we have, a major gap, this international control.
So can you explain more with the example what kind of the
Suppose a Belgian cooperatives control a private entity in France. Well, I can find maybe somewhere the information that enterprise exists, but I have absolutely zero information on that enterprise, no information on financials, no information on employment, nothing. So basically, I have no tools to quantify this international aspect. You know what I mean?
Okay, thank you. I think that's a very important remark, because we also know that the large cooperative, also the associations have now more and more the foreign subsidiaries, and then if we see just the national economy, these realities are not fully captured because they exist in different national economy scope. I think it's important to remark. Thank you. So, Yannick, do you have any idea about my question? So the mutuals, now I heard in France, some mutual and mutual insurance get together to create kind of group and having more complicated structures. So do you have any issue, for example, about this kind of the interrelationship among SSE entity and non-SSE entities in group?
But what we have yes, we've got the problem if in some groups, mutualistic group, we have some non-SSE entities, and in this case, they will not be in the statistic. Most of the time, members of the group are themselves SSE entities. So if I thinking, for example, at two very important groups, VIV and AMA. For VIV, there are at least three mutual societies and one cooperative, but there are all sorts of non-SSE entities, and in this case, they will not be in the statistics. Same thing for AMA. It's mainly an insurance mutual and health mutuals, so they are SEC entities, so that will not be a problem for us. So I think that this definition is okay for us. And regarding the international partnership, I think that if a Belgian cooperative own a French entity, it will be counted as a French statistic regarding if it's or not a SEC entity. So I think it's not a problem, I would say.
Augustin?
Yeah, yes and no, depends on how the methodology. But if we do so, this means that, for example, for Belgium, I would have to check all the private entities if they are controlled by an external non-Belgian cooperatives, which is a huge. I mean, this is very, very difficult to assess. This would mean that we would have to share internationally all entities in every single perimeter if they are considered as SSE. So, I mean, this for me, in terms of practicality, this seems very difficult.
No, it's not what I said. Sorry. What I was saying, if it's a Belgian cooperative own a French cooperative, for example, it will be counted in France as a cooperative, so as a SEC entity. But if it's not a cooperative, it's a Société Anonyme, for example, it will not be in the statistic. So you don't have to know what is the owner. You only have to know what is the legal status of the entity. So I think it's simpler.
David?
I would tend to agree that where an entity that is not registered as a cooperative or some other kind of SSE entity in a country, but is owned and controlled by an SSE entity in another country, it would be really quite difficult to actually be able to include those wholly owned entities or partly owned entities in the statistics to actually find out that they're owned. Whether this is statistically worth bothering with is another question. I know that, for example, here in Switzerland, one of the major supermarket chains, which is a cooperative, also operates a few shops over the border in France and in Germany. But I don't think that would have a very big impact on the French statistics of cooperatives or on the French statistic or the German statistics of cooperatives, because it's one or two shops over the border. If, however, it's some major thing, then first of all, I think that would be unlikely. But in most cases, it wouldn't be necessary to worry about it much from a statistical perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and then let's move to last point. It's about the primacy of the people and social purpose over capital. And I think we had quite clear also understanding about this and consensus. So if you have any question or doubt or proposal on this point, please feel free to share with us. So as you recognize that our approach proposed to measure this with the non-profit or the limited distribution profit approach. So in that way, the primacy would be said that tangibly material in material way be supported. No, that's our logic. Just saying primacy people as just a statement, but it should be institutionally and practically proved with this non-profit or the limited profit distribution constraints. And we have the clear already definition about MPI, and we consider cooperative and mutuals have their own way of the limiting their distribution of profit or in a significant way. And also other legal forms can have the similar level of the constraint to guarantee their the protect their mission from the profit-driven intentions. Actually, in the another working group on the measuring economic contribution of cooperatives, we have some discussion on this point because according to the SNA 2025, all the surplus from the cooperatives are considered as just profit. There is no difference between profit and surplus in the current system, and even the accounting rules does not really help to clarify this point in many countries. Only some countries where cooperatives are under the special audit, they have to divide surplus and profit, and they need to justify how the surplus are distributed and profit can be distributed. So it's a quite difficult issue even for cooperative, but what we are talking about is that how we can show this specificity of the surplus, net profit, in the financial or accounting and the statistic system is challenging, but in that working group, we are trying to show this the characteristics clearly to be recognized. Probably not right now, but at a certain point in the accounting system and also the static system. But we realized that it's although for the practitioners of the SSE, it's very clear about the cost of surplus and all other this asset lock, all these issues. But for outside people, they because the current accounting and the static system is based on the conventional capitalist the business model. So these concepts are not fully recognized. So that's challenging, not only that group, also for this work. So how we can, if we, a cooperative distribute their surplus, is still the distribution of profit or not? That's something we want to bring at a certain point to this discussion. But at this stage, we don't go further on that. But there are some issues, potential issues we need to deal with at a certain point. Eduardo?
And I think this ambiguity, considering what consists of surpluses and profits, may also create some other consequences. For instance, in Portugal, not only because of that, There are other reasons, but essentially in Portugal, all cooperatives are legally considered non-profit organizations. So there's no profits, there's always surpluses. And internally, the NSO decided to classify some cooperatives within the S15 subsector, which apparently is not, it's contradictory to what the SNA stipulates for cooperatives. And I raised that issue in my comments because this is, of course, limited to some cooperatives, especially social and solidarity cooperatives that have cooperation protocols with the state. So, in fact, the way their economic values are calculated lead them to be classified within this subsector and not others. But this is something that eventually can rise, especially in Portugal. I don't know if this is a reality in other countries, but the SNA, by adopting this perspective, as you said, more capitalistic, I think, and not seeing cooperatives as the exception they are in terms of entrepreneurial structures and frameworks and models, is overlooking this. And at least in Portugal, the NSO decided to go against it, and it took to arms to have a different interpretation. But this then creates some issues and some inconsistencies, so to say. So we also have to think about this as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think if we have at least 3, 4, this kind of the small revolution from countries, we can make kind of the bigger front to explain, there are differences, but as Portuguese did. Other countries, is there any the reflection on this point, like the issue how the surplus from cooperatives or mutuals can be considered not as profit, but classified in different ways to show their specific nature? Marie-Paul, in Quebec, when you made the survey, did you consider also the difference between surplus distribution and profit distribution?
No, we did not make a difference between both because we know there's a difference, but it's hard to acknowledge without looking at the detailed financial statement of each entity.
Mm-hmm. But what I understood, you also collected the financial information from individual cooperatives, entities. No? You are muted? You are muted. Marie-Paul, you are muted.
Microphone, Marie-Paul.
We do have financial data on individual cooperative, but we don't know if the surplus is the result of their activities with a member or not. So is it profit or is it surpluses? That's the tricky thing. So we don't go there. It's too complicated for the data and the detail we have.
Okay.
And in the social economy portrait, we did not, we included all cooperative straight on because they have rules that make the surpluses or profit distribution not by the capital detention, but by the level of use, which is coherent from people over capital.
Okay, thank you. So if there are any other countries who have some experience to collect information about the surplus, yeah, Ray, please.
Yes, in the Philippines, we have a concept. We have a concept or statistical concept which is net surplus. This is the when income minus expenses, then we have a net surplus. It is allocated to several accounts, which is number one, to reserve fund, and then to cooperative education and training fund, and then to interest on capital and patronage refund. So not solely for the returns on capital, but also in other allocated in other forms of returns to members, benefits to members.
So do
Also
you,
in community development fund.
okay.
Yeah.
But can you distinguish the cooperative income from their members and from non-members, or just all cooperatives?
Yes, the interest on capital will redound only to members. But when it comes to patronizing patronage, the patronage refund, it may go to members as well as non-members who are patronizing the services or products of the cooperative. But it is largely distributed for members, to
Okay.
members.
Okay, thank you, Ray.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
And Mari,
Yunshik, you're muted.
okay, thank you. In the chat, Mari asked about to make a question to Lei Yu. Is there any interest rate on capital is kept limited, or there is no limit, but by cooperatives themselves they decide? Ray, you are muted. Ray, hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
So when the cooperative have to make a dividend to their members' capital, is there any limitation kept?
Yes. There is a limitation set by law.
Okay.
I forgot the specific percentage, but we have the law provides for how it will be computed. There is a formula specifically provided by law.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
That's to protect the equitable distribution of net surplus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will contact you again for another working group to get the information.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So if there will be no other question on this, I think we dealt with the 5 principles, and from your input, we really appreciate your effort to make your input, and these inputs show that we are now more or less the same page on this issue, and we have quite a good agreement on this direction, approach, and some details. So as Kiara noted here, we proceed with moving forward. The next step probably is more about how we can identify these conceptual entities in different national contexts and from different statistical sources. So, and our meeting will continue to deal with these issues. For your information, so now the ILO is preparing kind of the online platform, called Committee of Practice, to host more experts from more different region, different profile, and having more of the constant interaction through online platform. Not limited to this kind of meeting, but we will have kind of different discussion forum on different topics. So you can visit other discussion forum on measuring economic contribution of cooperatives. Also from the experts that working group can also join. So probably we will start working on that way from March, April. So it means that our community will be the bigger than before, and we need to a little bit adapt ourselves to the new way of communicating to facilitate all discussions. We wanted to have all other discussion forum on other topics like the data collection method, on specific method like the statutory account, observatory, or business register. So how they use they have some issue. So really to facilitate all discussions and exchange among experts or practitioners on these topics. So I think it will be really helpful for us. So in any case, we really appreciate your collaboration and input and support. And if you don't have any other specific comments, we may conclude today's meeting. Is there any specific comments, question about all general things? No, I don't see.
Maybe you want to, I don't know if you mentioned again that there would be work on informal entities so that we can capture that part of the ILC definition.
Yeah. So as already Chiara mentioned, we have been trying to identify the good consultant to work on the informal SSE entity issues because it's very, very technical, and this is even statistic SSE plus informal economy. So it's we had the difficulty of finding some good the resource person. So in any case, we will do it, and then so as you recognize that the very important part of our work here is missing about this informal part, and then it would be complemented by that the separate research frame. And also for your information, for the cooperatives, now we developed the cooperative statistic manual based on the guideline on cooperative statistics to have more the detailed the information and instructions to help the statisticians to produce the statistic on cooperatives in line with our guidelines. So we have some different work streams, and through the committee of practice, you will be able to see or participate, even collaborate for different topics on the statistics on cooperatives and SSE initiatives. Okay, so now on, it's now your turn to conclude.
Okay, thank you very much, Chiara, for the presentation, and thanks to Hyung-Shin for the guidance discussion. And I'd like to thank you all for staying with us until the end of the meeting, even though it's ran a little longer than expected, and highlighting the practical point that need to be carefully considered in the development of the SSE statistics. So it's time to close, but before we